Hello everyone, and welcome to this 2-volume DVD series on the Colle system. Now the Colle system is a pretty solid looking idea, but at the same time it's very aggressive too. I'm International Master Andrew Martin, and I'm going to be your host on this tour of what is a most fascinating and useful opening. An opening that can rack up the points, because I'm not so sure, even after looking at very high class games, that many black players are well prepared to meet it. They don't really think of the Colle as a dangerous opening, so they don't study it carefully. And there are plenty of ways that white can spring a surprise. So join with me now and let us take our tour of what is a most fascinating opening. Hello everyone, I'm International Master and FIDE Senior Trainer Andrew Martin, and welcome to this DVD where I'm going to be recommending that the Colle system is a good method of play for white. The DVD is split up into two parts, so to start off with, let's take a look at the contents list. Now in the first DVD, the first part of the DVD, I'm going to be looking at the Colle system proper, which starts after d4, d5, and now white plays knight f3. Note that I'm not going to consider other black moves after 1d4. Otherwise the DVD might take up 24 hours or something like that. Instead, we just concentrate on the way to the Colle system proper, which is with the characteristic move e3. Now this is a quiet looking move, but the thing about the Colle is it's a very deceptive system. White's position is often akin to a coiled spring. What looks passive suddenly jumps to life, and white can often get a very strong attack using the Colle method of play. And the Colle system proper starts when black plays e6. Now white puts his bishop on d3, and black pushes up in the centre with c5. Now once black does that, you almost always reinforce the centre by going c3. Again, we're not going to consider the Colle-Zukertort system where white plays b3 in this position. That's a completely different animal. Instead, I'm going to stick with the Colle proper. White plays c3, and now black's got to make a choice. What is he going to do with his minor pieces? Will he bring the knight out on b8 to c6, or will it come to d7? Will the bishop on f8 come out to d6, or will it go to e7? These are the immediate choices that black has to face in this position. Just to take play on a little bit, let's just assume black plays knight c6, white castles bishop e7. I mean, black can adopt other setups. Now white puts his knight on d2, black castles, and the scene is set for some sort of line opening move by white, which is absolutely typical of the Colle. And the way white can do this is to take on c5 and then to push forward in the centre with the move e4. This unleashes the dynamic energy in white's position, or is supposed to, and can often, as I say, give him a kingside attack. Just dropping back a couple of moves to here. Of course, there's no reason why white should take on c5 straight away. He might preface that with the move queen e2. An alert observer would have noticed in the previous position black could have exchanged off on e4 and maybe traded the queens. Well, this way avoids the exchange of queens, and if black, say, player moves like b6, then again white could consider taking on c5 and going e4. This is quite promising. Or he may think about the move e4 straight away. So this is the initial introduction to the Colle system. This is what white's looking to do. Build up slowly, unleashes energy of the position with the idea of e4. So in the first part of this DVD, that's what we'll be considering. Now in the second part, I go on to looking at alternatives for black. I mean, there's no reason why black should block in that bishop on c8 with e6. And this is a very important section of the DVD, because what we're going to find is that if black plays moves like bishop f5, which is one of his best moves, or bishop g4, or c6, these are all good moves for black. then white has got to change his method of play. He can't just go routinely on with the Colle setup. Bishop d3, c3, knight d2. Well, of course he can, but he doesn't emerge with any sort of advantage from the opening. And generally, against these setups which resemble the Slav or maybe the Baltic defence, white does best to go c4 as early as possible. So we'll be looking at that in the second half of this DVD. And finally, we'll take a look at g6, where black angles to go back into some sort of Grunfeld position. Again, a perfectly respectable method of play. And it's worth noting that a move like bishop d3, whenever black fianchettos the king bishop, is pretty useless move. That bishop on d3 is biting on granite. You know, it's hitting the pawn at g6. So again, against g6 systems, white's got to change his approach slightly. So that's what we're looking to do, and we're going to kick off by examining the Colle system proper. Now, of course, defensive technique has improved beyond recognition when we consider the games of 1930. But just to show you that the Colle system is still being used successfully today with the same ideas, I've got a game for you from the Belgian Team Championship played in 2016 between Tom Pichot, grade 2363, and Cemal Gulbas, grade 2360. So these are players approaching international master standard, if they're not IMs already. And it's interesting to see that white wins a very nice game using the Colle system against a modern player. So we get the setup where black plays c5, walks straight into the Colle, and Gulbas decides to set up by putting his knight on c6 and then his bishop on d6. As I say, this layout from black is quite important, and the knight on c6 is slightly more actively placed than it is on d7. But of course, a bit later on, when black plays b6 and bishop b7, as he usually does, the knight could be blocking the bishop. There are pros and cons to each of these minor piece developments by black. Anyway, white just gets on with the system. He plays his knight to d2, and now he decides to take on c5 straight away and play e4. Again, we're going to see a little bit later on what happens if black decides to trade the pieces here, trade the queens. This in general gives white a small risk-free advantage. And it introduces us to another key idea in the Colle system. The slight edge in development is also increased by the queenside pawn majority. In the Colle, you've got to watch out for pawn chains, ways of deploying pawns. This queenside pawn majority is a very interesting feature of Colle positions, and it often gives white a distinct endgame edge. Usually where the defender, or the so-called defender, has the kingside majority, which is what black has here, they've got to push these pawns forward quickly to start some sort of initiative. That's the way black gets best results with this type of pawn structure. Endgames tend to favour white. Middle games, black's got to get active. In general, black tends to avoid this variation because it's pretty unpromising. You know, white's got better development. As I say, he's got all the advantages of the position. So if we go back to e4, black now plays a very modern move, well, a very logical move as well, just b6. White played queen to e2, and black played bishop b7. So black's saying really, well, there are no bishop takes h7 sacrifices here, as after e5, as played in the game knight d7, the g5 square is covered by the queen. So white's got to find a different way of playing this position. My own view is white's got quite a promising setup. The pawn on e5 is a bone in black's throat. It gives white an advantage in space, but it's a question of where white goes from here. And Pichot decided to expand on the queen side by playing b4 and then knight to b3, whereupon black played a useful move, rook e8. You know, this is the type of move which modern players play almost automatically. It's kind of a prophylactic move. Black's thinking about guarding e6. Maybe you can get f6 in a bit later on, and he reserves f8 for the knight, which of course takes bishop takes h7 check, sacrifices right out of the equation. So as I say, white's got to play this slightly differently to get any thought of a kingside attack, and he decides to put his knight in on d4. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. And this looks impossible at first sight. Why isn't black just able to take this pawn? Well, I think the reason he can't take the pawn is that suddenly we have ideas of bishop takes h7 check all over again. Is this possible now? Well, black was certainly afraid of it, and with good reason. As you can see, queen's coming in, pretty nasty, and if black defends with knight f8, then we chop this off with a winning attack. So going back, black can't take that pawn really. He prefers the move a6, and white played a4, rather cheerful move, saying, well, you can't take the pawn again, and black drops his knight back. So as soon as that knight goes back covering h7, suddenly this pawn is now on pre, which is why white decided to cover it by playing bishop d2. But you see, from a quiet beginning, white has managed to work up a sizable middle game advantage, in my opinion. He has more active pieces. He's got this pawn on e5, which is stifling black a bit. In particular, white's bishops are very active, whereas the black bishops are rather passive here. So black has a bit more defending to do before he could ever claim any sort of equality whatsoever. And Gulbas decides on the modest queen d7. Well, h4. Very interesting move. Supporting perhaps bishop g5 or knight g5. Perhaps thinking of pushing the pawn up to h5 and maybe even to h6. White also makes, in the style of the King's Indian attack, the manoeuvre knight h2 to g4 possible, when there are sacrifices on h6 and f6 for black to consider. So all in all, a good move. And black plays bishop c6. So white marches forward, and black is happy to open a file on the queen side because, well, it means that he can exchange some pieces, which hopefully decreases chance that white's going to mate him. Well, let's see. Knight to g5. So h4 advertised this move. Black played h6 unafraid. White dropped his knight back to h3. And now black saw that, well, this attack actually was very dangerous indeed, with ideas such as queen g4 and then knight f4 to h5 in the wings. White's very quick on the king side. Black has hardly any counterplay to speak of. I mean, even if he trades rooks, the attack's still going to come to fruition. And taking off this pawn, well, this looks very risky. I mean, one move that white can consider is bishop takes h6. That's already pretty much an accident for black. And there are other moves as well. So black decides to play f5, hoping that the rook on e8 is going to see him through if white takes. But white didn't take. Instead, he played g4. Another very good move. The kingside attack proceeds at speed. It's really hard for black to get his pieces back to the defence. You know, his structure is not that great for defensive purposes. Well, black takes on h4. Bold, and lets the white queen in. White's in a hurry, overcomes the queen, attacks the bishop, bishop retreats, and now white gets rid of the rook on a8. That's a kind of useless piece in the attack, you know, the rook on a1. No need for it. Rook comes across to a1, bishop to e7, and now white brings his knight into f4. So this is a pretty nasty position for black. Very, very passive. Very little to do. The f5 pawn looks as though it's going to drop at any minute. It's not nice. Black played bishop g5, and now white moves forward with e6. Another very good move, and very problematic for black. White's clearing opened the way for his bishop to decisively enter the game. Queen to e7 was answered by another splendid move, bishop to b4. A deflection, if black takes the bishop, well, probably white gives check on f7 and then takes the rook, with catastrophic consequences. So black tried g6, and now white kept it simple. He took on e7, and then took on g5. And black resigned this position, as after h takes g5, knight takes h5 is a very strong move, and white has numerous threats. Black can't even take the pawn. Knight f6 is a threat. Black can't take with the rook because a8 would be hanging, and white's threatening bishop takes f5 anyway. So that's a typical example of a modern game in the Colle, and it shows that even very strong players, have difficulty coming to terms with the way white is playing. Now my next couple of games are going to highlight another theme in the Colle. White's not just limited to the development plan explained earlier, where he sets up this pawn triangle in the centre, then goes for d takes c5 and e4, or maybe e4 straight away. There is another method available. It's an interesting one. It's where white tries to set up a stonewall formation and get a big kingside attack. Now first, an old game, in fact Yusupov, modern day Super Grandmaster, is very keen on this idea, as we're going to see. Now the first game is really ancient. It comes from 1899 between two great players of the day. Jackson whips Showalter, and he's playing Janowski. This game was played in Brooklyn in 1899. And it doesn't start off with a strict Colle move order. In fact, it starts off with a kind of stonewall move order, where white hedges his bets. Is he going to set up a stonewall formation? Is he going to set up a Colle formation? We don't know yet, but let's see the effect of setting up this stonewall formation. Knight comes out, and then the knight comes in. Now we're going to see Yusupov using the Colle move order to get to a similar position, where he first of all puts his knight on f3 before moving the pawn on f2. But let's just say for the time being that black has to be very, very careful in this position. What are white's plans? Well, the first plan is to bring the queen out to an aggressive situation. She could come out to f3 and then across to h3. Now that's particularly effective if black castles on the king side, because white's eyeing up this h7 pawn. And in addition, in this particular situation, white's also thinking about simply castling and then maybe proceeding with g4. This is also a very dangerous attacking plan. So all in all, I wouldn't be very happy about going into this as black. I mean, I think it is defensible, but you've got to be extremely careful. Usually the way to interrupt white's scheme is to put the knight in on e4 at an appropriate moment. But of course, before black has castled, that move is virtually impossible due to a quick bishop b5, which would pin down that knight on d7. Well, if I was black, I wouldn't play the next move, but it just shows the imprecise play of the day. Black castles, and he's castling straight into a big white attack. Now, you can just imagine at club level, people just do this routinely. They don't even think that the opponent's going to hack them off with some big attack. But I don't know. I don't like that move. I mean, I think black should try and keep it as flexible as possible and play a move like queen c7 and just hedge his bets for the time being. What is white going to do? I mean, probably white's going to play queen f3. And then you see black would like to castle on the queen side, but it's very difficult to do that because f7 is hanging, and if he chops off this knight, this doesn't help either, because suddenly the f file opens up. Black is in all sorts of trouble. So it's not that easy for black already. In fact, it's interesting, just going back here, just right to the opening, Sultan Khan, a very old and famous chess master, used to play knight e5 straight away. Can you believe that? He used to play this is his variation. And the idea was to get a stonewall formation without delay by pushing up with f4. Well, that's another possibility. I mean, I would have thought the average club player would be completely on his own in this position. So all this sort of thing can arise from the Colle. So we'll go back to castles, and white now plays queen f3. So that's the plan in this position. The main positional idea of it is that you stop black from playing knight e4. And the main attacking idea about it is that you maybe want to swing your queen across to h3, possibly g4, g5 first, and then queen h3. Black is really under the cosh. So Janowski played queen c7. I mean, let's not forget, Janowski contested matches for the World Championship. Although he looks bad in this game, he was one of the great players of the day. Well, Showalter goes g4. Black blocks out the attack. White pushes forward, and now black hopes to erect some sort of a defence by putting his knight on h5. And now white can move his queen to g4. And that move is designed to stop black from blocking it up with f5. White could take en passant, and then e6 will be hanging, g6 will be open up for a big sacrifice. Janowski played knight g7. White played knight f3, knight f5, and now h4. Well, the point about this position is that white can actually take these attacks quite slowly because black hasn't got any counterplay. This is the problem with black's position. He's stuck. He's forced to sit there watching as white builds up this kingside attack. And white's attack is really quick. I mean, he can just go h5, move his king up, rook goes across to h1. You can see white is breaking in virtually straight away. So Janowski goes knight g7. Miserable move, but at least has the benefit of stopping h5. Also he thinks. Showalter takes on d7 and then puts his knight in and then plays rook f2. So the rook is en route to the h file. White is still thinking about this big attack. c4. I don't know. Hard to suggest moves. I mean, I'm coming round to the thought that perhaps f5 should have been played. I guess he didn't do that because after takes, the sacrifice on g6 is coming. It looks promising. Something similar happens in the game anyway. Don't know, maybe white could even crash through with h5 straight away, as he does in a similar vein in the game. Anyway, Janowski played c4. Not a move I like very much either, because it takes a lot of elasticity out of black's position, but then black is getting desperate. He tried f6. White took, as he must, opening up lines, and then ploughed forward with h5. Janowski played g5, and now h6. Very nasty indeed, and it's hard to suggest moves for black really. The knight moved back to e8. White took a pawn. King goes to f8, and now white just played a calm move, rook to g2, threatening infiltration on the back rank. Black took the knight off, the dangerous knight. White recaptured with the f-pawn. Black went rook f3, and now a very cute move by white. Now, of course, you know, a lot of players are going to argue, I don't like the stonewall formation because, well, I can't get my queenside pieces out. But as we've seen, maybe they don't need to come out when you've got an attack of this kind until later on. And b3 administers now the coup de grace, as the idea is simple. White's going to get that bishop into the game. Very, very nice indeed, and that is a winning move, because what's black going to do? Black couldn't have stopped it really. Can't move his queen to e7 because queen g8 is mate. So bishop a3 is the killer. Well, knight d6. Black should resign. Instead, a few more moves were played, completely irrelevant. Showalter just takes the queens off and then exchanges off the pieces. So that's an old-fashioned stonewall attack, which could crop up from the Colle and can be a very effective weapon. It's easy to underestimate these old-fashioned types of attack, the Pillsbury attack, the stonewall attack, all this stuff with the knight coming into e5 and f4. I would say it's equally effective in the modern day. Because, you know, club level, congress level, you're going to win a lot of games with this type of plan because you know exactly what you're doing, and to organise the defence is not at all easy. Well, we saw that in 1899 a lot of players were floundering against White's plan. Let's bring it up to the present day and see one of our heroes, Artur Yusupov, Super Grandmaster, playing with White, and he's playing Thomas Markowski, grade 2548, and this game was played in the Bundesliga in Germany in 2002. And it's interesting because White kicks off with the Colle move order. I mean, this is where we see it is possible to go into a kind of stonewall formation here, kicking off with the move knight to e5. Knight bd7 and then f4. Yusupov playing like Sultan Khan, putting that knight in on e5 as quickly as possible and then saying to black, well, how are you going to equalise against my plan? White could play c3, he's keeping some options available. He can even consider playing b3 in a position like this. The knight will usually come to d2. Queen f3 is on the cards. I prefer White's position. It's a bit static for the time being, but black has got to demonstrate a good flexible method of defence. And Markowski tries to do this by playing g6, which is a slightly unusual move, but very logical, because as stated earlier, black is just trying to put a brick wall in front of this bishop on d3. And after bishop d2, a very interesting move in itself, black just played bishop g7. Now, what is bishop d2 all about? Well, it's just serving notice that black must watch out for this dark squared bishop. You know, the bishop's lurking there on c1. It looks very inactive. But the idea is that Yusupov's going to go bishop e1 and get rid of his bad bishop locked in behind the pawn chain, by maybe playing bishop h4 at some point. As it turns out, white doesn't get to play that for quite some moves, but it is a very interesting idea. Anyway, black castled, white brought his knight out, and then Markovsky played c5. We know what to do against that typical Colle move, c3. So the Colle has changed into a stonewall formation, and it's something which I would urge you to watch out for, the ability to transpose from one system to another. Black probably isn't under pressure here, and he tries the usual recipe of putting the knight in on e4. Yusupov says, well, I think I've got a slight advantage here. I'm going to take that knight with the bishop, and then I'm going to bring the queen out to g4. And white's arguing that despite the fact his minor pieces look passive at the moment, they do actually have more potential than the black bishops at this present time. Well, for starters, white's threatening to take off that pawn. So on e4, black's got to do something about it. Markovsky tried to get some counterplay going by c takes d4, and now white played a slight surprising move here, bishop h4. Turns out white's still thinking about a kingside attack. He's going to take back on d4 with the e-pawn. Black's still going to have to look after his pawn on e4, and meanwhile white's going to put that bishop in on f6. Exchange off the defender near to black's king, and then start a kingside attack. So very interesting idea. h5, counterplay above everything else. And the idea is, after queen g3, that white's going bishop takes e5. So black is trying to dazzle white with tactics. Yusupov is on the ball. He plays queen takes e5, queen takes h4, and now e takes d4. Well, black's a pawn up, but the problem is that he lacks counterplay. His position's inelastic, and white has significant chances of starting a kingside attack, and he's even threatening to get his pawn back straight away just by going rook f4, although probably black would be happy if white took that pawn. You know, white's going to play rook f1, rook f4, and then rook f1. The kingside attack builds. So black tries to get his queen into the guts of white's setup by coming into e2, rook f2, black pins, knight f1, queen d3, and now white plays rook e1. So black's still a pawn up, but white is shunting his pieces into the attack, and Yusupov takes it on further by putting his queen in on h6. Well, now black's 2 pawns up, but he finds himself in an unenviable situation, with white leaving open lines against his king by playing g4. Black lacks a way to open up the position with his pawns and gain counterplay, so he's just got to sit there and hope that he can defend for the time being, while white masses his forces against the king by doubling on the f-file. Bishop a6 was answered by rook f2. Very interesting to see the way Yusupov plays this. He can take it slowly because black doesn't really have much to do. Black took on g4. Yusupov took with the knight. And now again a very sensible move here, queen to h5. But white's grip is so great that he was even able to exchange queens here and put the knight in on e5, which is a pretty nasty fork. Not only that, the black king is starting to look very, very open. Well, what is black to play? I mean, he simply can't allow white just to dismember his king, so he moved his rook. Knight took on f7, and black moved his rook up to d5. Then came a check. The king went to f8. Another check. The king went to e7. A further check. king goes to d6, and now Yusupov brings his rook into to g7, threatening mate, starting with rook d7. Markovsky takes off the rook and plays bishop b5. I mean, what's significant for me is how useless the black bishop has been all the way through this game. It's controlling empty squares, irrelevant diagonals. Well, this is about the best move the bishop could make in this situation. Finally, it's doing something, it's protecting against mate. But unfortunately for black, he finds himself in a kind of zugzwang here, because the knight on e5 is completely tying up the rook on d5. The rook can't get out, and even after e3, this was move 39, white gave a couple of checks. The problem for black is that after king g2, he actually lacks a decent move. It is in fact zugzwang if you look at the position carefully. So Markovsky resigned. Very interesting play by Yusupov. I mean, I suppose black can push his pawn, white moves his king. Doesn't really help the situation. So I think what we've seen so far is that white has various ways to tackle the Colle system. You don't mechanically need to stick with the original Colle plan of taking on c5 and going e4, but you can. You might consider playing into a stonewall formation by playing an early knight e5. Both of these ideas are very important strings to white's bow. Okay, so we move on now to, away from the introduction, to examining various black setups against the Colle system and ways of dealing with these setups. And the first setup I'm going to consider is the line where black puts his knight on c6. He plays c5 and then knight c6. A very natural continuation, and a lot of black players are going to do this. Black's also got a decision to make regarding his bishop. Will he put it on e7 or d6? Fortunately for us, the response which I am going to recommend deals with both these developments of the bishop in one go, which is helpful for us. So here we are. This is more or less the mainline position. Black's put his bishop on d6 this time. It won't make any difference, as you'll see, but with this specific setup, black is looking to play e5. I mean, that's pretty clear. Now, several moves have been tried here. White has tried queen e2. I think that's actually imprecise, because when black plays e5 followed by a swift rook e8, the white queen can often find itself in the wrong place. So I think you're advised to steer away from queen e2 in this position. Rook e1 is also a move, again preparing e4, and we get some complicated lines coming from e5 and then e4 by white. But again, I think it shouldn't be too difficult for black to equalise in this position. So dropping back, the move I'm going to recommend is very straightforward. We're going to take on c5. Black's got to recapture, and as you can see, if the bishop was on e7, it wouldn't make any difference. Black would still take the pawn, and now we're going e4. This is the original Colle formula. I suppose a lot of white players would see this as a drawback, that black can take on e4 and start liquidating the position. So the first line we've got to examine is the line where black does precisely that. What is actually going on in this situation? I've chosen a game from the Abu Dhabi Open in 2004 between Grandmaster Tejas Bakray from India, and he's playing Jesper Mork Lauridsen from Denmark, 2-2-8-3. And in this game, black decided to play his queen to c7, presumably trying to follow up with a move like rook to d8. Now, it's very critical what happens after queen takes queen. I mean, this alone might put a lot of white players off. Do we really play the Colle to play a queenless middle game? But I think white has got hopes of an advantage in this position. And moreover, it's very hard to win with black from such a situation. White's got control of the d file. He's got this queenside pawn majority. And black has the usual queen's gambit problem of developing the queenside pieces. So for me, this is slight advantage to white all the way, and with no winning chances for black whatsoever. Now, the normal move here is f6. If black gets this far, he may well know this move. And after that, I'm going to recommend the Colle formula, playing the bishop out to e3. This is a good move, and I think should ensure white at least a slight risk-free edge in all lines. For instance, if black decides to be ornery and keep the bishop on the board, Well, then we just take on c6 and go knight to d4. This is already slightly awkward for black, as the white knight is very well placed, and if he's allowed to come into c6, this could spell extreme problems for black. So there was a game from St Petersburg in 2001 where black played bishop d7, and now white played the splendid knight f5, ensuring that when black captured, and let's not forget both the black bishops are now attacked, the rook comes down to a very good square, he defends the bishop, we bring our rook across. Very nice position for white indeed, full control and probably a winning advantage. So going back, black's got to do better than that, and the way he can try to do that is to take on e3 and then go knight to d8. And this was played in a famous old game between Colle and Rubinstein in Berlin in 1926, which was given an equal sign, but I'm not so sure. Let's follow this game on for a little while, with Colle massing his rooks in the d file. Rubinstein played g6, and now I think Colle played a decent move, but a move which isn't really necessary here, bishop c2. And Rubinstein was able to equalise by expanding on the queen side. Rook to a7 and rook to e7, black has equalised, getting ready to advance his kingside pawn majority, stands okay. Well, that line is okay for white in itself, but I think a4 is a clear improvement. Trying to cramp black on the queen side and just threatening to push that pawn all the way up to a6. I don't think black can equalise fully against this move. Rook b8 is what the machines are suggesting for black. Now I think h3 is just a good move, taking away some squares, giving the king a bit of luft, and then after king g7 by black pushing on with a5. If black plays b6, we take it, and this move should ensure white at least an edge after either black capture. For instance, if rook takes b6, well, I think b4 is quite nice for white. He's now got a passed pawn on the queen side. Black's still finding it difficult to get his pieces going. This seems like a nice edge for white, and just dropping back, if black takes back with the pawn, then rook a1 looks good. And if f5, trying to get the majority going, white comes in with bishop c6 and again claims whatever edge there is in the position. To be frank, I think this trade of queens going all the way back is prospectless. I mean, you can play this endgame with black for sure, but it's hard to see black winning, and therefore a lot of players would perhaps stumble into this and really not know how to handle the black position. So going back to Backré versus Lauritsen, black played queen to c7, and now seeing rook d8 coming up, white played queen to e2, and black just played his bishop out to d7, a modest move. Now black can't be too ambitious in this situation. For instance, there was a game between the Dutch IM Gerard Welling and Backré, where black played a5, white played queen c4, and then suddenly out of nowhere white whipped up a very strong attack after bishop takes h7 check. It's one of these situations where the queen comes across, the knight comes up, black is suddenly in all sorts of trouble. So maybe white's threatening some sort of trick with queen c4. Bishop d7 was answered by rook to d1, and after rook a d8, Backré played g3. King goes to h8, and white brought his bishop out to e3. Black snapped at the bishop, queen takes bishop. Well, once again we reach one of these middle game situations where a couple of pairs of minor pieces have been traded off, and black finds himself just a little bit worse. It's a nagging edge which is very difficult to shake off. White's got better minor pieces, certainly a better bishop, and that queenside pawn majority lurking in the wings. Middle games which could easily go into an endgame are really quite difficult for black. So Lauritsen strikes out with f5, and I think this is a severe strategical error. I mean, I think what black's got to do is play f6 and hold a tight line, trying to keep the white pieces out, and I presume then white would play a move like rook d2. The game will continue with white slightly better. But f5, that's pretty horrible. bishop takes c6, and you can see the idea. White's going to put his knight on e5 without delay. B takes c6. Well, that's not nice either. I suppose what black didn't like was after queen takes c6, white's got this cunning move here, queen to e5. That's just very strong. The point of it is to retain the knight, so when black keeps the queens on, we're going to take on d8 and go knight g5 with a sudden and very strong attack after queen b2, rook e1. If after queen e5 he takes the queens, in comes the knight to this beautiful square. White reinforces the knight, brings his king up with an undisputed advantage. It's going to be a slow grind where black's advantage, his pawn majority, has been lamed, and white is just cruising in this endgame with quite a substantial edge. But going back to the game, b takes c6 was not nice. White now played queen to c5, very good indeed, just dominating on the dark squares. Black cannot lift the bind by exchanging queens because that just allows the knight into e5, and this is an immediate mess because black can't play bishop e8. Moreover, in the game after rook e8, rook d6, very easy to play this position, an absolute dream. White's controlling all the dark squares, and knight e5 completed the bind on black's position. Bishop b7, and this is a spot the win situation. Can you see how white polishes black off in one glorious move? Might be worth turning off the DVD here to just see if you can see white's win. Yes, here it is, the splendid rook to d8. An absolute crusher. If black takes with the rook, we take the queen. If he takes with the queen, we go knight f7 check and whip off the queen. And you see, black really has no compensation here for the queen. Rook and bishop are nowhere near enough because his bishop's paralysed. The rook came into d1 check, king g2, and that was the end of the game, as white's threatening both the bishop and queen e8 checkmate. Black can't stop either or both of those threats. So this is a game which, if we go all the way back, hints at the fact that the situation after e4, if black trades on e4, is really not very promising for him. Almost as an appendix to the last game, let me quickly show you a game from Madrid in 2007, where once again black takes on e4 early and lives to regret it. It's a game between Hector Elizalde Cardenas, I hope I've got the pronunciation right, and Arturo Pascual Perez. Now the black player is only graded 2020, but I imagine that for viewers of this video that would represent quite a substantial opponent. So it's very nice to see players of this calibre being smashed up by the Colle. And we get quickly to the normal position after e4, with black cheerfully trading on e4 twice and then playing his queen to c7. Now you recall in the last game white played queen to e2. This time white strikes out with queen a4, which looks like quite a harmless location for the white queen, but in fact white is set in a devilish trap which Perez Pascual walks straight into. He calmly played bishop d7, and now lightning strikes with this bishop takes h7 move, well, wiping black out almost immediately. We quickly see the point of queen a4. White wants to swing his queen across the fourth rank to h4 and then bring his knight up to g5, and that spells curtains for black, as when he moves his rook, which he must, in comes the queen comes in once more, he takes on g7. Well, who would want to be black here? Black played rook f8, and now knight e4 is just a winning move. White's threatening the bishop, he's threatening ideas such as bishop g5 or queen f6, and black is helpless against the threats. So yes, that is a miniature, and yes, your opponents might not fall for that. It's games like that that are worth committing to memory, because they show typical traps and very plausible scenarios in the Colle system. This could easily crop up. The Colle is a bit of a deceptive opening because there are an awful lot of tricks and traps which are concealed in the position, which are almost invisible. You know, you wouldn't normally think that there's anything there. It's a very placid situation. and then suddenly the position blows up. And the following game illustrates this perfectly. It's a Grandmaster game. It comes from Budapest in 2001 between Mark Narciso Dublan, grade 2554, and the veteran Hungarian GM Laszlo Barksay. And it follows the main line very conveniently for us via a slightly different move order to normal, but we arrive at the Colle setup. White takes on c5, black recaptures e4, and now Barksay plays a very plausible move, e5, and you have to know what to do against this. Well, the best move is to take on d5, and in this game Barksay took with the queen, whereupon Narciso played queen to c2. So clearly there are immediate ideas of knight e4, after which h7, as marked, would be a little bit tender. Barksay ignores this threat by playing bishop g4. Again, he thinks to himself, I mean, I can just see how he's thinking. If white plays knight e4, I can take on f3 and mess up the pawns around white's king. Yet that's exactly what happened in this game. Narciso played knight e4, and suddenly, even after bishop f3, gf3, this position is very difficult for black. Just to show you what happened in the game, black played king to h8, and now white played a shocker, c4, and Barksay completely collapsed. He clearly overlooked that the queen was needed to defend the bishop, or so he thought, and then he collapsed with queen d7, after which Narciso wrapped up nicely by simply taking off the bishop. Black tried a trick, white played bishop f5, and just queen d3 consolidating. White wins in 17 moves. Now, just dropping back to the position after c4, black can obviously do better than this. He's got a very precise line to follow, though, to get any sort of position, and the only move really is queen d8 here, which allows white to take the bishop and now b6. And it turns out that black is going to regain his piece with the help of a move like knight b4 coming up. So white now has to play precisely. If he just plays knight e4 rather carelessly, knight b4, and black is well in the game. So his best move here is bishop e3, and again black's best move in return is knight to b4, otherwise white gets to take on c5. Queen to c3, and now take on c5. White should play rook a d1. Now this position, although white's not material ahead and he seems to have a shattered king position, is very dangerous for black, because white's idea is to get a grip on the d file, an unchallengeable grip, and I'm not sure black finds it very easy to shake it off, with ideas like bishop g5 coming up with control of d5. Very difficult for black to shake off the pressure. For instance, if he plays rook e8 here, we go bishop g5, let's say rook b8, hoping to activate the pieces. We'll then just simply take off the knight and go rook d7 with a nice easy position for white. And going back to bishop e3, let's run this one more time. Knight b4, queen c3, takes on c5, rook d1, chop chop, queen, rook fe8, bishop g5. Well, if black tries to defend himself with queen c8 here, which is intending to shoot out to the king side at a moment's notice, we're going to take on d7 and jam him up with rook d7. And if rook g8 check and then queen f8, we now play the very careful move, queen d3. Well, actually, king f1 before was very careful, because there's a secure haven on e2 for the king, and after queen d3, queen g7, queen d5, white is completely in charge of the position. So going back one more time to the position after queen takes d5, queen c2, bishop g4, knight e4, very easy trap for black to fall in for, as you can see. What happens after knight takes e4? Bishop takes, and now queen to e6. Well, I think here white should keep it very simple. Just go bishop takes h7 check, and then bishop f5. And if queen f6, obviously white's got to be a bit careful here because of his opened king position. But I think king h1 here, and then rook g1, this is giving black some headaches. Black certainly can't equalise here. There's no attack against white's king, and white is getting ready for bishop g5. So after knight e7, bishop e4, queen b6, as recommended by the machines, we have bishop g5, f6, and now bishop h4, defending ourselves. And if g5, which black is hoping for, b4. And this gives white a very good, if not winning, position straight away. Obviously, if black opens up his king, he leaves himself vulnerable to moves like queen c1. If he goes bishop d6, the idea is to sack on g5, rook takes, give a check, bring the other rook in. It's curtains for black. Can black improve on this line? I mean, these lines give you a really good flavour for how the position should go. Knight takes, bishop takes. Can black play, for instance, queen d8 here? With the idea after check and bishop comes back to get the queen in with queen h4. Well, once again, I think there are two choices. I mean, we can take on c6 here and go queen e4. And after queen h5, queen g4. This is one possibility. And after queen h4, we may also go b4, trying to drive the bishop off the diagonal. If bishop stays on the diagonal, then bishop e3. And after rook c8, maybe take on b6 and go queen e2. Well, obviously this position's unclear. I imagine white's a little bit better. However, as we've seen, even for a grandmaster, it's not easy to negotiate these complications. And as we saw, after king h8, c4, black collapsed in a heap. Let's have a look at this variation one more time. The line where after white plays e4, black responds with e5. Here we are, coming up. White takes on d5, and this time black recaptures with the knight. This is another plausible continuation. It does leave the king side looking rather bare, but is white in any position to take advantage of it? If white plays knight e4 in this position, then he kind of blocks the bishop in on d3. That move's been played successfully. Then I guess after bishop e7, white's got to rely on his queenside pawn majority to furnish him with chances. Much more promising, and the move I recommend here, is knight to c4. With two motivations really. The first motivation is just to hit that pawn on e5, and the second motivation is to set up ideas of bishop takes h7 check again. So I've got a game from Germany for you in 2011 between Malshagen and Esser, where black played f6, presumably trying to cut all of white's threats out. Now, just going back, if black decides not to weaken his king side and to play rook e8, then bishop e4 is a nice move, putting the pressure on the black knights. And if bishop e6, well, we just take on e5. This was actually played in Lomacko versus Bezgodova, played in Poland in 2009, and after knight d3, bishop d6, queen h5, white easily consolidated his extra pawn after queen f3, queen takes f3, bishop takes f3. Going back to knight c4, bishop g4 also looks like a steady developing move. This was played in the game Kripo versus von Holzhausen, France, 1927. And again, bishop e4 was a slightly awkward move for black to meet. And one of the main points of it is that if black decides to retreat with knight d e7 check, then he falls for this cheapo bishop takes h7 check, and suddenly the bishop on g4 is undefended. Hence, von Holzhausen took on f3 straight away, but of course this gives white a very steady edge after queen takes and then rook d1. In the game, black played queen c7, white advanced on the queen side, black tried to save his bishop, and now a cruncher takes on b6 and then rook to d7. And in this position, believe it or not, black decided to resign. Well, of course his position is utterly prospectless, but it might not be resignable. However, he decided to do that. White wins. So going back to knight c4, you can see with this idea of bishop e4 as well introduced into the position, you know, white's got lots of chances. Hence f6, and Malshagen played queen to c2. Another good move, probing the black king side. Well, black played h6, but of course suddenly holes are starting to appear all over the place, and white was on it like a shot he played knight to h4. Black tried to cover the holes, and now we're going to see yet another point to knight to c4. White is able to play b4, by force nabbing that dark squared bishop, if White wants to do that. In the game, White thought he saw something much better, and he played b5, a very forcing move. When the knight went to a5, White took it, played his bishop to c4 check, and then his bishop to a3. Completely tangling Black up, and immediately threatening, of course, bishop takes e7 check, not check, followed by knight g6. So queen to c7, bishop e7, queen takes c4, only move, knight g6. Perhaps this is what Black overlooked. At any rate, Black's completely bust now. The bishop just retreated, f5. Really, there isn't much point playing on. Black's bishop disappeared, and that was the end of yet another Colle miniature. So just summarising, going back to this position after, where we are, e5, we take it. If he takes with the knight, then I think knight c4 looks like a good move, with all sorts of ideas in mind. Well, I think we've seen so far that getting a good position with Black in the main line, when he puts his knight on c6 and his bishop on either e7 or d6, is not totally easy. White can cause problems by taking on c5 and going e4. Taking on e4 didn't look satisfactory really. Queen c7 is okay, but White gets slightly the better of things. h6 is another interesting move that Black can try. Now the point of this move is obviously to firstly cut out any bishop takes h7 check sacrifices. Black's just trying to wait constructively, and he takes away the g5 square from White's bishop on c1, which might like to go there in due course, and the knight on f3. So it is a useful waiting move. And en passant, Black sets a little trap in that he's kind of encouraging White to push on with e5. Now, usually speaking, that's quite a good move, because the pawn at e5 provides a bridgehead behind which White can build an attack. But here, it just leaves the pawn a little bit tender. And with moves like knight g4 and queen c7, Black is already putting the pressure on. You see, because White can't play rook e1 here, due to the fact that f2 is hanging. So White's got to try knight b3 and then bishop f4, but even here he runs into the excellent move f6, and the problem is the pawn on e5 is pinned due to the unprotected bishop on f4. So going back to h6, we can see this is a move that must be given serious respect. I've chosen a game from an Italian Open tournament played in 2011 between Dennis Rombaldoni, 2498, and an Italian player called Mauro Casadei, to illustrate what I think White should do. And I think White should play queen e2 in this position. This is the right moment for the move. White is setting up the usual Colle ideas. Eventually, if Black doesn't take on e4, he's going to play e5. It's just that that move requires a bit of preparation. And Black plays the usual move here, queen to c7, again discouraging e5 due to knight g4. So White goes bishop c2, again just waiting to see what Black is doing, and Black played bishop d6. White went h3, and Black played bishop d7, rook e1, and now White is definitely threatening e5. As Black has conveniently positioned his bishop on d6 and his knight on f6, ready to be forked, Black's probably got to liquidate here, and that's what he did. He took on e4, f5. This has actually been played a few times, not without any great success for Black, because after queen c4, the Black position is a little bit loose. I think White can claim an advantage here due to the fact that White's pawn structure is a little bit loose, but of course White's got to prove it. Now in Rombaldoni Casadei, Black played knight e5, trying to simplify the position even more, because well, we can see that the knight and the queen are under attack. In the game Franklin versus Eggleston, played in England a while back, Black preferred to play rook a e8, and I must say that looks like a more natural move. Nevertheless, after bishop e3, White is working up an edge. White plans moves like rook a d1, then bishop c5, and could have some pressure. King h8 was played by Eggleston, just getting ready for e5. Franklin played rook a d1, e5 came, and now I think White missed the best move. he went in for rook takes d6, which is nothing more than a flashy liquidation here, after queen takes bishop c5. Instead, much better, was knight h4. A significant improvement, which is actually quite difficult for black to defend against. Looks as though black can play rook f6, but then white plays a stunning move, which I think frankly missed, and is very easy to miss here, g4. Undermining black's pawn chain completely. You wouldn't normally think of such a move. Of course, computers help us to find these moves routinely. And the point is that if black takes it, queen e4 is a crusher. So I think that would be quite a good answer to rook a e8. We've got an improvement ready, knight h4. Let's go back to our featured game and knight e5, and which I think white's got to take as far as I can see. So knight takes, bishop to b3. A definite looseness in the black position, you know, based around his central formation there. And of course white's now threatening to win a pawn by just simply going queen takes queen, followed by taking on e6. So black defended himself, and white brought his bishop out to e3. Still not easy for black to equalise, because white's got the more compact pawns. He's got the queenside pawn majority. What is black doing here? This is the thing. I'm looking for an active plan from black. I don't see one. Well, white may be threatening bishop takes a7, so black goes a6, rook a d1, bishop c8, and now a very good move, queen to b4. Just taking charge of some dark squares, threatening moves such as bishop b6 or bishop c5, and generally making black's life uncomfortable. Black played b5, and Ron Baldoni just played a4. So we've got to kind of transition into middle game position, where white certainly holds the advantage. He's probing at black's pawns after a4. If black takes on a4, then his pawns become even weaker. Bishop b6 after that might be a problem. So black tried to get some tactics going, as most players would do, let's face it, with the move f4. Bishop c5. And now black just collapsed in a heap. He tried f3. No good. I mean, this may work against a weaker player, but scare tactics don't work against grandmasters, because they simply analyse the position. If they feel there are no tactics present or nothing's working, they just take off the material, and that's exactly what Ron Baldoni did. Well, you can try a few things for black here, but I assure you they don't work. Casadei tried pawn takes pawn, bishop d6, that cut short the entire game, and white resigned. Now let's go back to bishop c5. Could black do better? Well, he can certainly do better with rook f5. I mean, that's a more challenging move. But even here, I think white can take on b5 and brave the tactics. Once again, computers demonstrate to us that whilst black can play f3, and this sets up threats of bishop h2 check, followed by the capture of the bishop on c5, white can play g4. Turns out white can allow this check, park his king in the corner, and after a few captures, turns out after king g3, white maintains a significant advantage in this endgame. So I'm not sure. I don't think black can actually equalise after bishop c5. I think he's just worse, which tends to mean, going all the way back to h6, that white can play for the advantage in a very steady manner by just playing building moves. Queen to e2, bishop to c2, h3, rook to e1, building up a nice position, typical of the Colle. It's interesting that you can get to certain positions in the Colle from different move orders. The game I'm going to show you actually started life as a French defence, but turned into one of the main lines of the Colle very quickly. It's a game from Rio de Janeiro in 2015 between Rafael Diego de Berardino, grade 2496, and Ricardo da Silva, whose grade is 2220. Seems like stronger players have recognised that the Colle is a very good patsa bashing system, something which they can use to avoid too much risk and yet at the same time create really strong attacking chances against lower rated players. Now white kicked off with e4 in this game, and we're going to see that the game started life as a Tarrasch variation of the French defence, where black played a6. This is a kind of trendy move, and black is basically preparing the move c5 without allowing things like bishop b5 check at some point. D takes c5 was answered by knight f6 and queen e2, bishop c5, knight f3. You can see how the Colle system is coming about. And hey presto, here we are in a Colle, where black has now actually played this move a6 on move 9 in place of moves like taking on e4 or queen c7 or h6. So a6, another waiting move. Should white play a move like knight b3, I dare say black's intending to run this bishop back to a7. Added to which, black's thinking about moves like b5 and bishop b7, getting the queen side going. He's also encouraging white to play this lemon e5 when knight g4 and queen c7 rounds up the pawn. You know, white's got to find something a bit better than that. Black went e5. Well, you can imagine that this comes from a Colle where after a6, white plays queen e2. I think that's the best move, as in the case of h6. So black played e5 in this game, and white took on d5 straight away, opening up fire against the king side. Black took with a knight. Now, he can take with a queen. Very challenging move, which I think white should answer with knight to e4. Generally a good idea when that queen comes up to d5, because you're opening up the bishop on c1, you're threatening the bishop on c5, you're certainly threatening knight f6, damaging the king side. And after bishop e7 defending, now I propose that white goes knight fg5. And this once again is a loosening move from black's perspective. White's threatening to take on f6 and then take on h7, so black's got to block that. And now I think we take on f6 and play rook to d1. Once again, we see that white's getting the advantage without too much risk. He retains his compact formation and he's setting up really nasty threats. Well, black's got to move his queen, so the only really decent square is a5, and now we go knight e4, bishop g7 and bishop g5. So very quickly white has built up a nice attack. Actually, I'm pretty sure this sort of position occurs in the c3 Sicilian as well, this type of thing, and so you can see the transpositional aspects of the Colle system. Now certainly it would be unwise of black to allow something like knight f6 check. I mean that would just be absolutely crazy. It would give white the ideal springboard to start an attack, followed by, let's say, queen e4 to h4, something like that. So f6 probably. Now we give a check, drive his king into the corner and just come back. You know, black's king side has been really severely weakened. White's got ideas of bishop c5 now, or knight d6. Black's more or less obliged to try and get some counterplay going, but after knight g5, I really wouldn't like to be in black's shoes. Seems to be in this variation, you know, with queen takes d5, black's coming forward too quickly. He's not the Colle formation sufficient respect. And with ideas such as knight e4, you know, white should be able to work up some sort of advantage. Anyway, in this game, which is interesting from many perspectives, black took with a knight, white played knight b3, black retreated his bishop, and now white went gaily in with bishop takes h7 check. And really the question is, does it work in this current position? Well, interesting. I don't think white can be worse after this move, but whether it's the best move, I'm doubtful. I mean, I think actually in this position, if you want a good move, rook d1 fits the bill. No need to go ballistic with bishop takes h7. The point of this is to rook d1 is to obviously create pressure on the d file. He's probably got to retreat his knight. And now we've got a choice between bishop g5, which looks okay, but will probably be answered by h6. Then you've got a choice, what are you going to do? Or perhaps better still, going back, just bishop c2 keeps the pressure on. This quiet move sets up numerous ideas. Certainly the position of this bishop on d6 pinned against the queen is pretty uncomfortable for black. Computer suggests he should go h6 here, and now white wheels around with his knight to e4, something like this. Well, it may be that black is okay after knight takes e4 and then queen c7, because black's getting ready for moves like bishop f5. So maybe in this position queen d2 is the best move, reminding black about his pinned bishop. Quite awkward for black, that move, because if he moves the bishop back to c7 after trades on d8, he's actually going to lose that pawn on e5. So he's got to make a most uncomfortable block here with knight e d5, and then we just go knight e4. Again, this undermining move. Black moves back, white goes back, and you see black's bishop's still pinned. And when he unpins, we just whip everything off. Thank you very much, goodbye. White's a solid pawn up. So perhaps this guy 2-4-9-6 missed the best move in this position. Rook d1 looks good. But bishop h7 check, well, you can draw your own conclusions about what happens in this game. It looks like he was just bluffing, maybe. So king takes h7 forced, and now white made a mistake. What he should do is play queen e4 check. That would basically get to an equal position. There's not going to be any checkmates here because black can play knight f6, black can play bishop f5 in due course. So, for instance, after knight g5 and queen h4. So, white will probably take the knight, and now knight e7, queen e4, queen c7. This is okay for black, I think. Black's getting ready to use this bishop on c8. Maybe it will come out to f5. But you know, for weaker players or players who suffer from some sort of anxiety when they come under attack, it's difficult to see your way through the complications, you know, especially when a really strong opponent lands a blow like bishop takes h7 check. It's got a kind of shock effect. You look at the position and you think, have I really missed this move? You tend to panic and make mistakes in the defence. Well, it's interesting here that white went queen d3 check. I mean, did he really miss e4? Queen takes e4 check, f5. There's a big difference here because white can't take the knight due to bishop takes h2 check, winning the queen. So I actually think that white made a mistake here. Really, he should have paid for it after queen d3. Black should have played bishop c7. I mean, that's an easy move to play. And you just protect all your pieces. Protect the queen so you can move your knight to rook d1. This should be very good for black. Instead, perhaps feeling a little bit shaky, black played knight f4. And white continued to build up his position, a clear piece down, after rook a d1, queen f6, rook f e1. Well, let's take a look. White's got two pawns for the piece. Shouldn't be enough, but black's got problems developing his pieces, let's put it that way. Completely easy to get the black position going, especially the queen side. So white's got temporary compensation. Black went rook d8. Looks sensible. White whipped it off and continued to build pressure with knight c5. Well, I think with black getting ready for moves like bishop e6, that move was imperative. You know, white had to guard the e6 square. And now black plays b5, which is actually a mistake. Looks like the most natural move in the world. But in fact, it's a mistake. What he should do is simply to go queen f7, try to consolidate, or maybe queen c6. This game serves to show that the defence in chess is not easy, particularly when you're playing somebody who can intimidate you with their rating. I mean, this is exactly what happened in this game. Black played b5, queen came in, and this is problematic for black because his pieces are suddenly in trouble. This rook is suddenly in a mess, you know, and well, I'm not sure what black should play with rook e8 as probably a very nasty threat in the position. So black tried queen to c6, allowing the knight to drop. Black's hoping that he can grab the knight on c5. Rook e5, very good move. And now bishop b7. Again, a fatal tactical error. But even if black plays queen c6 here, I think rook e8 is very strong. Well, winning, I think, because what can black play? He's almost paralysed. He wants to play bishop b7, but now we go check, check, forking king and queen, check on d1, and then take the queen with a winning position. So bishop b7, desperation. Queen takes rook in the corner. Queen takes rook on e5. Queen takes bishop on b7. And black suddenly finds himself 2 pawns down for nothing. He tries a trick, but white can easily consolidate by playing g3. That really is a dampener. And with queen d5, the stronger player has come to his senses, he centralises his queen, black's position is loose, he's 2 pawns down, resigns. So not an justified win by white. It's worth reminding ourselves that this line where black has played a6, we play queen e2, he goes e5, I think the capture on d5 gives white very good play. One thing has been bugging me throughout this entire section, and it's certainly an idea I would consider if I was black. What happens if black plays the immediate e5? Black puts his bishop on d6, white castles. Now, in every other game we've looked at, black has castled. But it seems to me that black's set up his pieces to play e5, so why not do it straight away? And I think this move poses quite a difficult challenge to white to find the right continuation. It's logical, it's what black has been building up to, and black is threatening e4. Now, to me, a continuation, I mean, white can do this, like d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes, bishop takes. This doesn't satisfy me very much at all, because it just looks like a reverse Meron, where, you know, if you were white in this position as black, I want you to try and, you know, imagine the colours are reversed. You think it was about equal, but when you're white and you've got this position, you know, you don't think that this is anything special. I mean, there was a game between two female grandmasters which went like this: knight f3, bishop c7, and now white could find nothing better than giving a check and simplifying the position. Takes, c4. I mean, this is correct play by white, but it's not very inspiring. I would quite like more from the Colle opening than this. So going back to e5, you know, white's got to find something different. He could do this, luckily. I propose that on the occasion you get this variation, you give your opponent a real shock by playing the immediate e4, leading to a colossal confrontation in the centre of the board. And if black hasn't prepared this in advance, he could certainly get it wrong. Now black is faced with some captures to worry about. His king is still in the centre. That is the problem with this variation from black's perspective. So for instance, a continuation like pawn takes pawn on d5, that's the idea. Knight takes pawn would be slightly problematic for black if he took with a pawn, because then we give a check. Well, I think white holds some sort of advantage in this position. Black blocks, we bring our knight in, and however he plays, we get a good position. For instance, if he castles, then we're going to put our knight on g5, forking the bishop on e6 and the pawn at h7, so h6 takes. This is a steady advantage for white, who has some pressure on the light squares. We run this one more time, e takes d4. Now obviously, if you want to play it safe, you don't need to give the check. You want to play it really safe, you can just go knight b3. And it looks like some sort of French defence where all the tension's been taken out of the centre straight away. That leads to a solidly equal position. Much more ambitious is to give the check. Bishop e6, knight e4. And now, if white wants to land this knight g5 trick, well, you know, there is a chance. So h6 is logical. And now there are two ways to play this position. You can play the immediate bishop b5. This is quite interesting, threatening to take on d4. And if castles, just take on c6 and play knight takes d4. To me, there's every chance of a slight advantage here. Black should probably play rook e8, with the idea that if you take on c6, he's going to take on h2 check, and after king takes, get the piece back with, well, what looks like an equal game. So probably better here is just to play b3, and then when black saves his bishop to b2, again with a steady small edge due to the poor black pawn formation. Now let's go all the way back to e4, and we're going to follow a game from the 2015 Bavarian Championship between Dieter Piero, grade 2370, and Elmar Kaiser, 2210, where black indeed played c takes d4. Now what happens if black plays d takes e4? Okay, we're going to take it. He takes back, we take it, and then he takes on d4. We take again. He takes. You can see the position can liquidate very quickly here. Well, now I think a very good move for white is just to take on c6. Watch out for this opportunity, messing up the black pawns. Then we play rook e1 check, bishop e6, knight takes d4, and again white is enjoying a nice edge in this position. Black's not even going to get the bishop pair to compensate him for his bad pawn structure. Let's say he castles. Well, then we just carry on, knight takes e6, and then go, well, we've got quite a nice choice here. We can go queen g4, or we might prefer queen b3. I think I like queen g4 better than that. And of course, this variation highlights what could be wrong with the whole concept from black's point of view. He's opening up the game while his king is still in the centre. And this gives white the opportunity to land these tactical ideas, such as knight takes d4. And now, you know, black is forced to weaken his pawn structure. So black's got to get it right after the jab e4. And it's worth noting that if he castles, we can get a very familiar position here by just taking on c5. And after e takes d5, well, aren't we transposing back into something very familiar indeed? So after e4, black has got to show some skill. And in this game, Kaiser took on d4, and then we get the variation we just looked at. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. Well, black decided not to brave the complications after e takes d4, rook e1 check in this game, and it's what a lot of players will do. He decided to castle. Well, let's see what happens after that, because there are still some traps to be negotiated. White won a pawn. He took on e5. He took again. Then he went bishop h7 check. This is the idea. King takes, queen h5 check. A fork. King g8, queen takes e5. And out of the opening, black suddenly finds himself a pawn down for, well, I suppose there is a little bit of compensation here, because the white queen is rather exposed in the middle of the board, and opposite colour bishops on the board. Black's got some initiative here, you know, thinking about moves like knight to d3 or knight to c2. But you can't help get the impression after knight f3, knight d3, queen h5, that actually it's not enough. Black hasn't got enough compensation for the pawn. Well, Kaiser played knight takes c1. You know, I'd really like to do better than that with black, because, for instance, after rook a takes c1, I just see now white a pawn up, or if black even gets his pawn back, white's going to have a really nice initiative here. So going back to queen h5, can black do better than knight takes bishop? Well, he could try queen f6, keeping his strong knight in the middle of the board, but then I think we go bishop e3, and this is a bit awkward for black, as if he takes on b2 with the knight, bishop d4 just wins, as you can see, a winning fork. And if he takes on b2 with the queen, then I think we just go rook a d1. These opposite colour bishop positions in the middle game depend on the initiative, and whereas black had a small initiative before, white has shown himself willing in this position to give back the pawn in order to get the initiative himself. And I would say black is getting into trouble here. His king could really come under very serious fire very quickly. The queen and the knight drifting offside here. So that was certainly better for white, but maybe the whole position is just better for white, even when black takes the bishop. Queen to f6. Well, of course, white could play a move like rook to c2, but he prefers to go for the initiative. I think that's the right choice. Rook to c7. b6. Rook fc1 by white. Bishop f5. And now pawn up to h3. Black played bishop g6. White played queen to e5. And now queen to d8. Incidentally, if you were wondering why black was not taking that pawn on b2, it's because knight g5 is a rather strong move, threatening not only checkmate, but f7. So black is trying to find a way to steer around that idea, and I think it works in this position, so black can't take again. Here, again, we get some problems. The bishop's hanging, so bishop drops back. Finally, black's getting ready to take on b2, So white stops him and retains his pawn advantage. In comes the black queen. Up comes the white knight. Again, white shows himself flexible in his thinking. He's willing to give back the pawn in order to continue with the attack. And I think that's the right way to play these positions, because as we've seen, opposite colour bishops have now gone. It's a major piece endgame where once again initiative is very important. Well, black went into this horrible rook f7 move. White gave a check. Rook f8, rook c7 threatening mate. And now after rook f7, queen e8 check, rook f8, white took on g6. Queen a1 check, tries to drive the white king to a more exposed square. Buying time for queen takes b2. But after rook takes a7, white is maintaining his pawn advantage. Is this 100% win? Well, I think with perfect play, it's very difficult for black, because white can combine threats on the black king with the overall idea of ganging up on the b6 pawn. The tactics, as you can quickly see, are not going to work in black's favour. Black didn't do this in the game, but he doesn't do it because of check and then check, picking up the rook. So there are some serious problems here for black. He tried queen e5 check. White was happy to play queen to g3. And you see, if black refrains from exchanging queens, white just plays a move like rook b7, on with the game. He's going to round up that pawn on b6. Or, in defending it, black will find himself getting mated. So off came the queens. Only move here is rook b8, getting in behind the passed pawn. Rook a4, king f7. I mean, what struck me about this game was, after going a pawn down, what an impressive defence black actually put up. You know, so far, he's managed to make it difficult for white. And it looks, you know, you could see that this could go wrong. Well, maybe it should have done, but we'll carry on for the time being. Now, eventually, I think what's going to happen is black's going to queen that pawn. I don't think white can stop it in the long run, because black's getting his king nearby, ready to hit the rook, advance the pawn, and so on. Of course, white's got several pawns on the king side to advance, so that's exactly what he does to counter black's idea. It's going to take black a lot of moves, and meanwhile white's king side is advancing very quickly. So this is more or less forced. Now white played king h5. For me, that's not the best move, because it kind of obstructs the pawns. I mean, I think king f4 is more natural, and just push the pawns, let him come forward, we move across, let him come forward, and now go f6. Good move, as if black takes, we go g6, and if he queens, we take it and go h5. And this looks to be winning for white, as far as I can see. If rook g1, king f5, and I think the black king is just too far away here, white wins. Let's compare it with the game. King h5, black gives a check. King to g5, king to c3. What I didn't like about this line was that actually the black rook is not needed to queen that pawn. And so, could the rook be useful in defence? Well, white's got no choice, he's got to push forward. Then we get this sequence where, with rook f1, white's basically forcing black to use an extra move. King h4, getting ready for g5. Queen, take, g5. This is the game. And now I think black makes the fatal mistake. He plays rook h8. Rook b6 makes it slightly more difficult, as after h6 takes g6, we go check, has to come forward, and now rook f4. And if here, we take on f5, and then rook f1, which I think draws. So maybe black could have reaped the fruits of his hard labour in this game by playing rook b6. Rook h8, of course, is bad because it stations the rook on a very passive square. Now white's threatening f6, followed by g7 and h6, so black's got to stop it. But then king g4. And I think this is game over once again. as when the king comes closer, I think h6 is the killer, isn't it? Takes g7. Not sure how black defends himself against that. f6, what can he do? King's too far away. So black resigned. Well, to be absolutely correct, black resigned after king to g4. Well, this was quite an exciting game and interesting all the way through. Going back to the opening phase of the game, if your opponent sets up with knight c6 and bishop d6 and follows up with a quick e5, then I think you've got to change gears a little bit here. There's no time for queen e2 or rook e1 or even d takes c5. You should play e4. Well, now we move on to something slightly different, but the difference is significant. It's the analysis of a black system where he changes things slightly and he puts his queen's knight on d7, something like that. Now the reason this changes by force our approach is that if white ever takes on c5, black's going to take back with the knight, and white certainly doesn't want that, because the knight on c5 will not only hit the bishop, it will restrain white from playing e4. As we know, e4 is really the central plank of white's attempted play in the Colle. So white's got to change his approach slightly, and I propose he does this by playing rook to e1 on move 8. This is an essential idea in the position. If you're unsure whether to play rook e1 or let's say a move like queen e2 in the Colle, the rule of thumb generally is that if black can open up the centre with a move like e5 and he can put his rook on e8 quickly thereafter, generally the queen ends up misplaced on e2. As black can do this in the current position, rook e1 makes sense. Well, in fact, it's the only real move that makes sense to me. I mean, I suppose you could play a move like b3 and go back into some sort of, well, what is it? It's Queen's Indian reversed, where white's played this move c3. I imagine that a move like e5 just gives black a very comfortable game after that. So once you get here, you've got to continue with Colle play, and the way to do this is to play rook e1. And we're interested first of all in what happens if black plays e5. I mean, that seems to be the whole point of the black setup to me. And now white goes through with e4. So here we have a very confusing position on the board, and my impression is it's easier to get wrong for black than white. I was very surprised how many quick attacks white was able to whip up from this position. It did come as a bit of a surprise to me, I have to say. And my first game comes from Germany in 2007 between Guntram Lenz and Marcus Berenden. Now these players are not grandmasters by any stretch of the imagination, but they do actually combine to produce a very thematic game. Now the first move we're going to look at is where black takes on e4. I mean, that's a move a lot of club players are going to do, isn't it? And we take back with the knight. Black takes again, and now generally when white plays rook e1, if he gets to a position like this, he wants to be taking with the rook. And the rook has very aggressive designs in mind, as in many lines the rook swings across to h4, putting immediate pressure on h7. And black's got to be really careful in this position that he doesn't get absolutely slaughtered. Now in the game, Merenson played c takes d4. But let's take you through a couple of moves here. What happens if black plays f5? Black may think this is a good move, but in fact it runs into rook h4, and this is extremely unpleasant. If black now plays h6, trying to break white's attack, bishop c4 check is immediate carnage, as after king h8, black runs into the crusher, bishop takes h6. That's how quick white's attack is in this position. And after king h7, we go knight g5 check. Well, what's he going to do? He can't come out. Queen h5 check is end. And after king h8, just go queen h5 anyway. And as you can see, white is pulverising black. Worth noting that after f5, rook h4, e4, this is running into bishop c4 check and knight g5, which is absolutely deadly in this position. So back to rook takes e4, and clearly black cannot play f5. So what about knight to f6? Another very plausible move. Well, then we're going to go to h4 anyway. Well, this is extremely dangerous because white's threatening bishop g5. That is a very, very dangerous threat. Let's just see it happen. If he goes c takes d4, bishop g5, black cannot play h6 here because white plays bishop takes h6. I think this is just a pretty devastating move, and if black takes it, we go queen to d2, and that is curtains for black. As if he tries to defend himself with a move like knight to g4, we can even sacrifice the rook here in order to get into h6. Again with a winning attack. White threatens mate. If black goes f5, then bishop c4 check is immediately the end. So as you can see, this is a very deceptive position, and let's run through that one more time. Knight f6, rook h4, c takes d4, bishop g5. What happens if black gets greedy here and starts taking things? Bishop takes h7 check. That is a very good answer. So returning to rook takes e4 one more time. As stated in the game, Berenson played c takes d4. If he makes the other capture, e takes d4, I recommend white takes back. And then if knight f6, rook h4, our old friend. And black once again has got to be extraordinarily careful. Now if he plays bishop e7, trying to stave off the idea of bishop g5, now queen to c2 is a good move. A slightly surprising turn of events whereby the pressure on h7 is now intensified. Once again we get our old friend here, h6, bishop takes h6 coming in without any loss of time, and this queen to d2 move. That is the killer blow. And once again knight g4 loses to takes, f5, and then the check, forcing the loss of all black's pieces, and thereafter mate. So going back to the game, I hope you can see immediately how black could be getting into trouble. And after c takes d4 as played, Lentz played rook h4. So there we are, it's all coming to pass. Knight came across to f6. Bishop g5, h6. Well, black could try to jettison a pawn here by playing e4 and then bishop e7, something like this, and try to beat back the attack this way. But I think queen takes d4 is now a simple way to secure pretty significant advantage for white, a pawn up. White can just play it safe from here on in. Okay, it's not going to be 100% easy to win this position, but well, you settle for being a pawn up out of the opening, wouldn't you, with no obvious compensation. Going back in the game, black played h6. That got clobbered with bishop takes h6. e4, white completely ignored the threat, played queen to d2, threatening once again carnage with bishop takes g7. So e3, trying to block him out, f takes e3, d takes c3, queen takes c3. Black thought he could take the bishop, he can't. Rook takes h6 is pretty pulverising, bishop e7, rook f1, all the pieces come in, and then queen to e5 was the end of the game. Black resigned. So a miniature there, quite common in this line, where black gets it slightly wrong and as a result gets wiped from the board. Well, black clearly has got to do somewhat better than he did in the last game, and there are various ways by which he can attempt to improve his play. We're going to take a look at one of these now. It's a game from Greece in 2012 between Tornika Sanikidze, whose grade is 2596, and Nikolaos Galopoulos, Greek player with a rating over 2400. So these two are pretty strong. Now we're going to see first of all that this game started life as a semi-Slav Queen's Gambit. This opening, particularly if white plays the variation with knight bd2, offers the opportunity to transpose back into the Colle after about 8 or 9 moves, as we're going to see, with white playing e4, black playing e5, white takes on d5, black recaptures rook e1, and hey presto, we're back in our familiar position with this very confusing standoff in the centre of the board. And now recommended for black is rook e8, just maintaining the symmetry and saying to white, show me what you've got. And now we reach an extraordinary position where white takes on d5 and black takes on d4. It looks incredible, but every single square on the d file is occupied by a piece or a pawn. Now it's clear that in a situation like this, white's got to use his extra move very intelligently indeed in order to get any sort of advantage. And the way I recommend to play this is to go knight e4, attacking the black bishop on d6. This forces black to be very, very careful, as if he takes on e4 and white takes back with a bishop, not only could white be threatening ideas against the black king, he's merely threatening to take this pawn on d4. The pawn on d4 is suddenly a lot weaker than the white pawn on d5. So this could easily go wrong for black, and he could end up a pawn down for nothing. So Galopoulos played bishop b4, which is the recommended move, but I'm not so sure this doesn't give an advantage anyway. There are two ways. Now in the game, Galopoulos played bishop d2. I classify that as the most natural move on the board, if white can get away with it and keep his advantage. Also possible, going back, is to take on f6. And when black recaptures, to take on e8, black takes back with the knight, and now to play the move queen to b3. I think this is pretty good. There was a game, Roussel-Rouzemont versus Perry Rodriguez from Canada in 2016, where white played queen to a4. But I think queen b3, and won eventually, but queen b3 I think is a better placement of the queen, because it eyes f7, and that doesn't seem significant at the moment, but let's just go down the computer line here. a5, bishop g5, knight to f6, a3, forcing play by white, just getting all his pieces into the game, and then rook to e1. Black can't take on d5, that's the point in this position, because f7 is too weak. For instance, if he takes with the knight, chop on e7, and now knight to g5 is immediately quite horrible for black. So after bishop b4, yes, white can play knight takes f6 check and take on e8 and play queen b3. There seems nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Bishop d2 in the game was answered by knight takes d5, and Sanikidze took on b4, knight takes, and now bishop c4. And the point of white's play is to eye up the black king. Clearly he's also looking at that unprotected knight on b4. So ideas as queen b3 come into the frame. Knight d6 is certainly in the frame, as is knight g5. So black now suddenly has to be very, very careful. He tried knight e5. I think white's got to take that in view of the fact that bishop is attacked on c4. So that's what he did. And now f4, throwing the black position off balance. And black tried this move bishop e6, which I don't believe, but the problem with a move like rook e7 is that after queen b3, black could suddenly be getting into a whole world of trouble after knight g5. That is the problem, isn't it? All the pieces are converging on f7. Black doesn't seem to have an effective defence. So seeing all this, Galopoulos tried bishop e6. White was happy to take on e5. As I say, good players don't panic. You know, just because the black gets a little bit of counterplay, it doesn't mean he's got enough compensation for the exchange here. In fact, white finds an excellent move. He goes knight to f6 check, slightly unexpected, clearly missed by black. This more or less finishes black off, because what is he going to do? In the game he played king h8. If he takes this pesky knight, we just take back. And the issue for black is that if he takes on f6, we take on b4, and well, black certainly hasn't got any compensation here, because he's having to work with an open king. Can't really play this positionally anymore. He's got to defend his king, which is pretty unpleasant when you're the exchange behind. Running that one more time, takes. Can black improve by going d3 check, throwing this move in and then taking on f6? Something like this. Well, I mean, white can play queen d2. That looks pretty safe to me, but also possible, and once again shown by the cold-blooded computer, is to just play b3 and then bishop rook a d1. I suppose human beings might not like this because black is able to threaten mate, but again, cold-blooded play by white can clarify the situation. Black tries a few tricks, white can easily repel the tricks. So I guess the story is really there's no satisfactory continuation for black after knight f6. I mean, king h8 was not that great. Knight came to d7. Black has to keep protecting the knight. White went a4. He's happy if black takes the knight. White can take the knight on b4. Queen a5, rook a c1, hitting the bishop. Bishop goes back, and now the knight finds an excellent square on c5. After bishop a2, knight d3, the position really was clarifying now, significantly in favour of white. Knight came to c6, and now another crusher, b4, and black resigned. There really is no move. If queen takes a4, rook a1 cleans up. So my diagnosis is that, going right back to the opening, after rook e8, it's actually not that easy for black to equalise at all, and white could start the ball rolling towards a nice advantage by taking on d5 and then going knight e4. Now, people who think the Colle is not an aggressive opening, they've got completely the wrong impression. The Colle can lead to some really violent chess, and some quite original chess as well, as we're going to see in our next game, which comes from the Turin Olympiad, played back in 2006, from the match between Georgia and Colombia. This might seem a little bit of a mismatch, but well, Georgi Kachiashvili is playing white, grade 2605, against the Colombian player Sergio Barrientos Carvarigiaga. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. Anyway, he must be an IM. His grade is 2430. And once again, this game starts life as a Queen's Gambit, semi-Slav variation. Well, Meron really, with white playing e3 very early on. This has transpositional qualities, as we've already seen, with white expanding in the centre, black doing likewise. Take, rook e1, hey presto, we've got our position. Now, a lot of club players are going to look at this situation, if they ever get here, and almost freak out, because it is an incredibly complicated line. What you have to remember when you're playing white is, if he takes on e4, you're going to take back with the rook. That is the main point. The rook's coming over to h4 to do some serious damage. Now, black can take on d4 in this position. I mean, I think that is the way to go. White could play rook h4 straight away, but I don't see why white shouldn't just play rook takes d4 here. I think that's a good move. It takes note of the fact that white's got one extra piece in the game, the rook. And this is a significant gain. You wouldn't normally see the rook roving around the centre of the board so early, but this move, rook takes d4, gives black a few problems. What is black to do? He could end up in a real mess here. The knight on d7 could be pinned. So the best move is thought to be bishop c5, hoping to harry the rook, and that's what Barrientos played here. But now comes the excellent move, rook to d5. The rook refusing to leave the centre, keeping everything under control, and keeping the black minor pieces in a real mess. Now, if an opponent like Barrientos can go wrong, and basically he does go wrong quite quickly in this game, then so can your opponents. It's easy, I think, in this position for black to go very wrong, to get intimidated by the white initiative. I mean, white's also got bishop takes h7 check ideas in the frame, without doubt. Black played queen to e7. Now, queen to b6 is supposed to be the best move here, but then I like very much the move queen to c2. This hits h7. It prevents black from defending with knight f6, because then the bishop on c5 is hanging. That's one of the main points of queen c2, and forces black to weaken his kingside. So, for instance, if h6, we come bishop f4, and white has got a big advantage here. It's very difficult for black to develop his pieces. White can build up while he's getting ready for a move like rook e1 or rook d1, isn't he? With a big edge. And going back, after queen c2, if black plays g6, then again bishop f4, and black is in a hell of a mess. Hell of a mess. I mean, he really does have problems untangling his pieces. If he tries queen c6, trying to buy a bit of time for b6 or something like that, by hitting the white rook, now bishop c4 is a good move. Once again, black cannot challenge the situation with knight f6. He runs slap bang into another lovely white tactic. Black's losing his queen. So let's run this again. Queen to b6, queen to c2, excellent move. g6, bishop f4, queen c6, bishop c4. Can black do better by playing a5? Rook a d1. So easy for white to build up here. Yeah, well, this is just a pretty horrible position for black, whatever he does. I mean, once again, let's just illustrate it with a cute trap here. If he tries b6, we have rook d6. Another very good move. If bishop takes d6, bishop takes f7 check. If queen b7, then disaster strikes quickly and effectively with rook takes g6 check. And that is curtains once again. So this small discussion should give you the impression that you can finish a lot of opponents off from this position very quickly if you know what you're doing. And that's exactly what happened here, as Kachiashvili answered queen e7 with bishop g5. Just a very, very strong move indeed. Black had to play f6. Once again, he loved to play knight f6, but again that runs into queen to c2 with a double attack on h7 and c5. It's a kind of trap, but I'm not actually sure you can classify this type of play as a trap. It's more like black not really understanding how dangerous the opening is, underestimating it, and suddenly finds himself in a position where there's absolutely no comeback whatsoever. So naturally, after king h8, I mean, white probably has several ways to win, but the quickest is just to take off the knight and go rook h5. Black is not coming back from this with bishop g8 as a threat. So, for instance, that's why he can't play bishop g4. Bishop g8 takes. Very nice, thanks a lot. So, let's see, what's he got? g6, well, take it, king g7. I mean, white could play this simply, just move the bishop back. White's not only got a crushing attack, he's 2 pawns up, so that's completely hopeless. So f6, white played bishop f4. I mean, f6 is not a move you want to make here. And now I really don't see what black's going to do. I mean, if he moves that knight, he runs into our old friend bishop h7 check, and then the check picking off the bishop, and that's pretty nasty for black. Black played queen f7 in the game, attacking the rook, or he thought it did, but then bishop b5, another disastrous move for black, as his pieces are hanging in the air. The knight on d7 is needed to protect the bishop. The knight's attacked 3 times. If black plays rook d8, we've got rook takes c5. It's horrible. The Colle wins in 17 moves, and Barrientos resigned. So my impression is that in this line where black goes for a quick e5, it's not that easy to equalise, and white has got plenty of excellent chances. Now, one of black's most solid systems comes about when he plays his queen's knight to d7, and then he plays his bishop to e7. This is a very secure system for black, quite logical, and I imagine will be quite common in your games. It's very significant that the bishop on e7 is useful defensively. In particular, the bishop is eyeing up the h4 square, so it makes it very difficult for white to use the h4 square, let's say in the same way he did in the last variation, where he moved his rook to h4 and got some aggressive chances. So this time, again, we've got to change the approach slightly, and I'm going to recommend queen e2. The reason white can play queen e2 successfully here is that the bishop on e7 obstructs the e file, and it's much more difficult for black to get e5 in quickly to expose the position of the white queen. So queen e2 is completely acceptable here, and again white's looking at the move e4. Now we're going to follow a game from the Bad Mergentheim Open from 1989 between Carsten Hoy, a very strong Danish player who was graded 2.510 at that time, and the German player Daniel Holtzapfel, and black played b6. Now I imagine this is a sensible approach which a lot of your opponents again are going to play. Of course that does step into e4, and we note that in certain circumstances white could be forking a rook on a8 and a pawn on h7 So black's got to be a bit careful here. Let's just go back one move and give black the move queen c7, which is another possibility in this position. And again, white goes e4. White's probably got to do that, as black is thinking about e5 now. So after e4 takes, is the defence so easy? Black normally plays b6 in this situation. If he starts to get too passive and trades off, followed by knight f6, queen goes to h4, and suddenly white has got the attacking chances he desires. For instance, if black goes b6 here, trying to get the pieces out, bishop comes out to g5, already threatening bishop takes f6 and queen takes h7 mate. He plays h6, and I think now white's got two interesting choices. He can obviously take the knight and go queen e4, and I think here black's got to give up the queen for black's got to give up the two rooks for the queen, or, and this is very interesting, white can maybe play bishop takes h6, reaching a situation which the computers give as equal, but where after bishop c2 I wouldn't like to be black at all. Is the defence so easy? I mean, the most natural move in the position fails to rook a e1, and black has very severe problems here. White's just threatening rook e5, rook g5. What is black going to do about it? Taking on f3 doesn't help. That simply opens the file towards the king. So now white's threatening king h1, followed by carnage. So all in all, I think going back, b6 is a better move here. And then there was a game between Witkowski and Gentz from Germany in 1994, whereby white took on f6 now. Knight takes f6, rook d1, and white got a nice position, but black was pretty solid after rook fd8, bishop f4, bishop d6. It is worth taking this game on a little bit, just to show you how white might work up some chances. He played bishop g5, threatening to damage black's pawns around his king. Black retreated, and now white played rook e1. Black thought he saw a pawn. White went rook a c1. Well, this is a good move. The point of it is that if black takes this pawn, we're going to take back with the rook, and now there are definite chances along the third rank for the rook to enter the fray. For instance, if queen to d6 here, we take on f6. Can we take on h7 straight away? Maybe black has to play king f8, because if he takes, we go check, king retreats, check, and here we see the use of the rook, rook h3. So going back to the game itself, this game Witkowski versus Gentz, rook a c1 contains a significant drop of poison. So that's perhaps why black played rook a c8. White took on d4, and black played queen to d6. And now again we get this combination. Is it working here? Let's just see. In the Colle, you've always got to keep an eye out for it. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now in bishop takes h7 check. Well, once again, I suppose black's got to play king f8 here and take his chances. Gentz took the bishop. White gave a check. King g8, queen takes f7 check, king, queen check, king g8. And now the real question for white is, can he force a win? Well, Witkowski thought so. He came in with the queen again. Then he took on c8, changing. So that if black takes with the rook, we can take the bishop on b7. And when black takes with the bishop, we go check, king g8, check, king, and now rook e3. Very good move. Again, threatening this move, rook h3, which is an absolute killer. So bishop g5 was played in the game. Konikowski gives queen takes d4 here. Rook h3, bishop h4. But then comes g3, a move easily missed. And if check, king g2, it's funny, black hasn't got any further continuation which helps his attack. He's got to try and move like rook d4, but then we go check, king g8, check, and just simply take the bishop, where we keep our attack, and black's going to lose this bishop on h4. So interesting stuff. Back at the game, Gentz played bishop g5. In came the rook. The rook came in again, decisive. And now queen takes g6, queen to g6 was mate. So that's a nice example of play after queen c7 in this position. Now in the game Colle versus Holzapfel, black played b6, well, white went e4. Black took, white recaptured with the knight, and now bishop b7. So nice economical play by black, and white put his rook on d1 rather than e1. So white's trying to find the best squares for his pieces. I imagine if black plays this carefully, he should be able to get to a pretty good position. Black took twice on e4, played knight f6, and Colle went back queen e2. Black went queen c7, bishop g5, rook f d8, and Colle took on c5. And now we've reached a position where it is objectively approximately equal, but, and this is a feature of Colle positions which I talked about before but haven't really emphasised strongly yet, the queenside pawn majority comes into play. You've got to watch out for this majority. As I say, in endgames it tends to favour white. In the middle game, black is looking very much to push his own majority. But can he do it here? Well, Colle played knight e5, and black was in a exchanging mood. He took the rooks off, rook to d8, off came the rooks, and now Colle played a4. So white really now has to make something of the queenside pawn majority, or this game is just going to fizzle out into a draw. Black played h6, solid, bishop h4, and now queen to d5. So black is still playing pretty well. c4 was answered by queen d4, and Colle now played queen to d3. Well, black now reaches a point where he's got to make a big decision. Is he going to take the queens off and go into the endgame where, well, he could be worse because of the queenside pawn majority, or is he going to keep the queens on by taking the knight on e5? It's these sorts of decisions that lower rated player can get wrong. He decided to keep the queens on. Now let's have a look at queen takes queen, knight takes queen. How bad is this for black? Well, black is certainly worse, but probably not too much after knight e4. I mean, I think this is what black should have done, and then take his chances in the position after, say, c5 takes. White still hasn't got a passed pawn yet. You can see there's one coming up with b4, and after that black's going to have a struggle on his hands to keep the draw, but I think black's got fair chances of a draw here. Nevertheless, this can be a typical endgame from the Colle system in this particular variation. Now after queen takes knight on e5, check, king h7, queen d3 check, king g8, Colle decided to take on f6, noting that the pawn ending after queen e1 check, queen f1 takes, and then b4 is lost for black. So again, Holzapfel took with the queen, white went queen d2, black went queen e5, and now just simply h3. And you wouldn't believe this is losing for black. The continuation will show you what dangers black can face in endings of this type, and they are very common in the Colle. So black pushed his pawns forward, white just took a bit of time out, and now on with the real plan of creating a passed pawn with b4 and then c5. Black went f4. I think that's probably the correct move here, because it tries to force a weakness on the king side. b4 on with the plan. Black played a5 trying to break things up, white took it, and then c5. Colle is even willing to let black take a pawn in order to get his own passed pawn going. That's how quick the game can turn in white's favour here if black goes wrong. Well, I'm not actually sure black did go wrong. I think, well, basically he got outplayed. He gave a check, he gave another check. Well, queen a2 check just takes the queen out of play. Queen d8 was played, in came the queen, and of course now, with white regaining his pawn, it's dead loss, because after queen c3, black can't really do anything. Can't move his queen, can't move the pawn on e6. What is white threatening? White's threatening to just infiltrate with the queen, isn't he? Something like queen c6, queen d6, and then queen d8, and I'm not sure what black can do about it. So black played g6 and simultaneously resigned. So an interesting game for several reasons. It is a solid system for black, but I hope I've shown that there are ways for white to play for the advantage. Particularly in this game, Hoy showed the value of the queenside pawn majority. Now, although I'm predominantly showing modern games on this DVD, I mean, you might have seen all the old games before, there is room for the occasional classic Colle performance. And this next game takes us all the way back to 1932. It's a game from Pasadena between two of the greatest American players of this time, Isaac Kashdan playing white and Hermann Steiner playing with the black pieces. And again, it's a good demonstration of how potent white's queenside pawn majority can be in the Colle when black allows him to get it. The opening of this game is also interesting because black is delaying c5. As soon as that bishop goes to e7, white puts his queen on e2. Good rule of thumb in the Colle, you're waiting for bishop e7 before you deploy your queen. So c5, c3, castles, castles, and now Steiner played b6, which to my eye looks as logical as it gets. Well, white played e4. Black traded, knight takes, bishop b7. Nice, seemingly economical method of play by black. Should be solid enough for equality, but maybe it's not so easy. And after bishop g5, we reach the first really interesting position in this game, as far as I can see. And the interest lies in where black's going to place his rooks. You might think it's an easy problem here, but I'm not so sure. I'm not sure where black's rooks should go. I mean, it looks like they should go to d8 and c8. Yet Steiner thinks it's more important to protect his bishop, and he plays rook f e8. I mean, you can't fault him for that decision. He's thinking about just trading some pieces, well, recognising white's setup is pretty good, just trying to make an easy draw. Well, it turns out the draw is not so easy, and Kashdan opens it with d takes c5. Now, if black takes back on c5 with a piece, white could damage the pawns on the king side by taking on f6. So black starts to trade pieces. This is what his game's all about. White trades because he has to. Knight takes g5, queen e7. You can see black's idea. Just trade down, keep the queens on. Despite white's queenside pawn majority, this should be an easy draw. Well, these positions are never that easy, and I think in the hands of a good technician, really black's life can be made a little bit uncomfortable here. Knight d4. White's thinking about knight c6, so black plays queen to h4, pinning the knight. White unpins, and now black just brings his rook to the centre, denying white the move knight c6. So all very, very logical and normal play. And a4 is the first signal that white intends to get those queenside pawn majority issues together as the endgame approaches. Queen f6. And now a move which, well, could have been delayed, but Kashdan plays it anyway, b4. And this is another critical moment in this game. What is the fate of the pawn at c3? White is looking to obviously play c4 at the right moment. He's also interested in maybe dominating the c6 square if he can. But I'm not sure he wants to play b5 and knight c6 just yet. I suppose after b5 the pawn at c3 is a little bit tender. So white goes knight b5, protecting that pawn, thinking about c4, and black played knight f8. Again, perhaps Steiner's approach is a little bit too defensive in this game. I mean, maybe he should just strike out on the queen side with a5. To me, that looks like a better move. I think a modern player would probably play that move. And now white's edge is small. The idea is, with the major pieces on, an attack against the queenside pawns should be able to give black enough counterplay to make a draw. As after knight f8, queen e3, still a little bit worse. No real way to shake off the disadvantage. That's the problem. As white can now play his knight into d6. Well, I don't know if black missed this move. He thought he could play rook takes c3, but after that, knight e4 is a crusher. as rook takes e3 is answered by knight takes f6, check, game over. And it doesn't matter whether black takes on d1 or not, this is game over anyway. So knight d6, very good. Let's have a look at rook c6. Maybe that was best. And after knight e4, just play queen e7. You know, white's still a little bit better. The same issues for black apply. The queenside pawns are going to come forward at some point. What are you going to do about it? But I don't know, this to me is preferable to what happened in the game where black played rook to b8. Bit passive. So rook d2, and white just brings his rooks cheerfully in behind the knight. Queen c7, and here we are, c4. Well, this is the scenario that black doesn't really want to see. He's very passive, and defending against this majority with white so well coordinated is going to be very, very difficult. Ongoing plans for white? Well, maybe white could stretch black even further by just playing ideas such as g3 and h4. I'd certainly be thinking about that to restrict the knight. Kashdan is direct. He sticks his queen in behind the pawn, getting ready for c5. Black gives his king a bit of air, and now just offering exchanges. The knight comes back, and the pawn comes forward. Again, a critical moment in the game. How is black going to defend himself? Well, he played queen c6, and now maybe a move black underestimated, queen to f3. It's easy to miss that move, you know, because your brain switches off. You think, oh, he can take the queen and mess up my pawns, but in fact black can't take the white queen here, because if he does, he finds himself almost in zugzwang. The pawn's marching up to c8, and black can't put his knight in the way due to knight b7, which wins immediately. So this helps to explain why, going back to the game, black decided to take on a4, but of course that lets the queen in on f7, and now the game changes slightly, as white's not only playing for some sort of advantage on the queen side, he's playing for an attack against the black king. So takes rook b8, and white just played king h2, what black played knight g6, and now rook e2. Once again offering back the chance to change the queens. Black could play queen f4 check here, but of course white takes that and goes rook e4. And as far as I can see, white is winning material. So difficult to play chess when you've got an open king. Even in this endgame, you know, white's thinking about not only queening his pawn, he's thinking about hitting g7. And this, once white gets the e6 pawn, it becomes easy to see how he might do that. Anyway, black went rook f8. White took the pawn, queen f4 check, g3, queen d4, and now white played what was more or less a winning move, as after queen e3, I think the exchange of queens is forced. So off came the queens. At least this way black gets white to take with the pawn and gets his knight on e5. King came to g2, black went a5, and now rook c2 obliges black to blockade. So that's what Steiner did. But now comes another excellent idea by white, counter sacrifice here, to lift the blockade and push his passed pawn forward. Rook came to d8, only move, up comes the king, a4, up comes the king, a3, king e5, and now black finds he's not in time. That is the issue here. He's not in time to stop the pawn. If black had his rook on c8, he could play a2 and make a draw, but now of course a2, white just takes it. So black played rook d3. In a way, this is the logical culmination of white's queenside pawn majority advance. On came the pawn, black tried the same. Black had to give it away to get his rook in behind the passed pawn, but now king d6. And the winning plan is quite nice. There are a few checks. Rook to a7. Classic rook endgame. White's threat, king to b8, answering rook b3 check with rook b7. Black resigned. So this was a classic Colle game, not for a winning attack or anything like it, but for a logical demonstration of how you might win as white when you get the queenside pawn majority. Well, now to finish off volume 1 of this DVD, I want to consider systems where black plays with an early b6 in conjunction with a move like knight bd7. And the move order I'm talking about is this one. Well, actually, white played knight f3 in the illustrative game that I'm going to use, but we go back into a Colle very, very quickly. And black decided to play b6, deferring c5 for the time being. We've seen what happens after c5 extensively in the preceding videos. But what I'm going to ask is this the right moment to play the Pillsbury attack? I mentioned it in the introduction that white could sometimes play knight e5 and f4. Is this a good moment to play knight e5 when there's not so much pressure on white's central pawn? I think this is a good move here, and well, white's intending to go f4 and to get some sort of stonewall attack against the black formation. The first game I'm going to illustrate this idea with is from Nalchik in 2013 between Kazbek Akbayev, grade 2490, and Yuan Shigalugov. And there black just played bishop to b7. Well, white played f4. Now in this type of position, black has already got to be careful. Black generally tries to defend against this type of attack by coming in to e4 at the right moment to block out the white pieces. So the continuation is quite interesting, where black plays c5, white plays c3. Black brings his bishop out to d6, and now the queen comes to f3. This is a very common location for the queen, and white is certainly thinking about moves like knight d2 and then queen h3, especially if black castles on the king side. This could lead to an extremely dangerous white attack. As it happens, black tries to intercept white's ideas by playing knight e4. But after knight d2, which is very well timed, he's got some problems, as he has to give up his control of e4, I think. Problem is, if he plays f5, queen h5 check looks very strong. Going back. If he plays knight d f6, well, white's got a number of interesting moves here. Bishop b5 check is interesting, which forces the black king to move as far as I can see. And also f5 is not so stupid. So black decides to take on d2. White takes back with the bishop and hope that he can gain some sort of equality after castles. Bishop e1. Obviously in the stonewall, white's bishop on c1 is the problem piece. Here white's trying a good effective way of getting that bishop out. f6. No, of course that's a catastrophic mistake. Now the thing is, what happens after f5? I mean, this is another common type of blocking move in this system. Well, I think against that, king h1 is an interesting move, intending g4. And that will be the way white whips up an attack, even in this situation. So, of course, if you can get g4 in at the right moment, you're obviously going to have a very strong attack indeed. f6, as played, leads to catastrophe, not surprisingly, with our old friend bishop takes h7 check. King takes, queen h3 check, this time slightly different. This manoeuvre, queen f3 to h3, very, very common. King g8. I mean, I can just see hundreds, if not thousands, of club games finishing in this way. Black tired after a long day at work, or frustrated, not getting the type of position he wants, blunders, white steps in, rook f3, well, game over. Rook h3 is a killer, and if g6, knight f7 check forces the win. Rook takes, queen takes, rook h3. So what are, going back, the important things to note about this formation? Well, it's very solid. It's very difficult to break down. That's why it's called the stone wall formation. And the f3 square is of utmost importance because it enables the white major pieces to transfer themselves into the attack. Queen f3 to h3, very important. Rook f3, as we saw in this game, the killer blow. g4, g5 is also an interesting method of play. So against an early b6, it seems entirely viable to set up a stone wall formation and go for the attack. The system where black plays with an early b6 can often transpose from other openings, as we're going to see in the following game, which starts life as a kind of Queen's Indian, where black plays a flexible formation. White is trying to play a Colle system, but of course black has not yet played d5. He only does that later. The true Colle system comes after d4, d5. not other moves. Obviously black can deviate from the way he plays in this game. For instance here he doesn't need to play d5, he can play bishop e7 and so on. It's convenient for our purposes that he does play d5 because it allows the knight to come into e5 and for us to get our favourite formation here after f4. This can easily come from the move order that we saw in the previous game. And we're going to follow a game from Argentina in 1999 between Grandmaster Guillermo Sopa, whose grade at the time was 2448, and Andres Rodriguez Vila, grade 2500. And basically black's best idea in this position is to keep castling flexible. Black doesn't need to just cast on the king side and routinely fall down against white's attack, although a lot of club players, this is precisely what they're going to do because they're unaware of the detail needed to play this system successfully. Now black played queen c7 here, again keeping it flexible. Another move is bishop e7, and after that I think I recommend queen to g4. Now that, if black castles, gives white a strong attack immediately, getting the queen into the right place. If black plays g6, then interesting here is the move c4, paying the black formation some respect and changing plan to an extent. If black plays a6, then b3, and if black plays b5, the idea is to take on d5 and to open up some lines in the centre. Knight f3 here, well, black may castle, white goes f5. This is all very new. I think the queen g4 line hasn't been played too many times before, as far as I know. So you can see white is getting his usual attack. Now in the game, Sopa versus Rodriguez, black played queen to c7, white played his queen to e2, and now black bit the bullet and castled on the queen side. So here we are, the flexibility of thought. Black's not going to just sit back and let white mate him on the king side. Black says, what are you going to do? But at the same time, I'm asking with white, what is black doing here? a4. Black played king b8, a5. Turns out white's going to get an attack anyway. He gets the initiative, puts black onto the defensive. So black must seek some counterplay, and the Grandmaster goes for it with f6. Well, of course, white opens lines. No surprises here. There's a lot of pressure on e5 here, so white's got to release the tension there. And now the knight comes to f3. Black brings his bishop out to d6. And now an indispensable move really, b4. So white is showing himself willing to sacrifice material here to open up the game, to try to get onto the attack. And that's exactly what you've got to do when the players have castled on opposite sides. Speed is of the essence in this type of situation. e5. Again, black hastens to go for counterplay rather than grab hot pawns. And indeed, if he takes on b4, then knight d4 is a good move. Hitting e6 with knight b5 in mind. If knight c5 by black, white takes on b4. Black takes the bishop, white recaptures. White still has lots of threats. Well, I imagine this is not an easy position for black to play. It's all you can ask really from an opening when you're playing somebody good. You get to a position you like, you've studied, you know more about. He feels uncomfortable. Well, this is the art of winning chess really. It's not about cheapoing the opponent or playing for tricks and traps. So in the game, black went e5. White went bishop f5. Black went e4. And knight h4 was played. Interesting here is pawn takes pawn. Again, opening up lines. Leaving the knight to be taken to be sure, but we want to take on d6. And if he takes on e2, we take on c7. Check. And then play rook e1. As far as I can see, this position might turn out to be good for white. As after rook a8, white can just trade the rooks and take a pawn. This endgame, whilst not 100% easy, is significantly better for white. Anyway, Sopa went knight to h4. Black took on b4. White recaptured, black took again. And now I think simply good for white is bishop to b2. I think this guarantees white a really excellent position with a strong attack to boot. Instead, Soper played bishop a3, and I imagine the complications here were taking its toll on black's clock. Well, that's the only conclusion I can draw from what actually happened in this game, with white building up what looks like a threatening position and black defending correctly with knight to d3. Well, white put his knight in on f5, and now black decided to play d4. Again, I should stress the end of this game is quite a surprise, because black loses in a position which he's not losing, but then he may have lost on time, I don't know, or the score of the game could be incomplete. A typical situation in large databases. They give you part of the game, not the whole game. I'm guessing that black lost on time in the final position, but anyway, you'll see what I mean coming up. Now here, black can play knight takes f4. He didn't, which tends to confirm that he was in time trouble, because a really strong player is not going to miss that move. Now after that, I think queen g4 is the move, and if black takes on h3, we take back. Now there are ideas of queen g3 in the offing, and after rook d7, check, queen c7, queen f2, again we reach a position that is difficult to judge, but very difficult to play for black. I mean, black is what, 2 pawns up here, but his pieces are in a hell of a mess, and white's attack is very real. So I imagine that analysing continuations like that were really tiring Rodriguez out. He plays d4 and sacrifices the exchange on d4, which I think again is a good decision. But amazingly now, after king f1, my score of the game ends in the mega database, and it says that white wins. Well, I suppose that black could have lost this game on time, but it's not a resignable position, is it? Especially as black can play knight takes f4. I think after that, queen e3 is probably the best move, and it's just game on. It really is game on. If black wants to play tricky chess, he can give a check, and then maybe take on h3 check, and who knows what is going on after queen b2. And white can still play this position because he's got massive threats of his own. King g3 or king e1 are both playable, but you wouldn't say it was resignable. There is a trick in the final position. If knight takes f4, queen e3 check, king f2, if black goes knight d3 check, then white can take it with interesting consequences. And I suppose this is my judgment on an early knight e5 against b6. It's just a very interesting move. It leads to interesting positions. At club level, you almost always get the initiative. You can follow up by getting a kind of stonewall formation and then looking out to create a direct attack. Well, on this first DVD of our 2-part series, we covered several of the most common main lines. And I think you'll agree with me that there are many tricks and traps which black has to avoid. That bishop takes h7 check sacrifice, as we've seen, is very common. The theme of the queenside pawn majority, when to play queen e2, when to play rook e1, when to play e4 straight away. These are all subtleties in the position which, if you know them well, can serve you with a lot of points. So now we progress to volume 2, and I hope you'll join with me there in a further examination of the fascinating Colle system.